welcome to another episode of Pause It Podcast. As you can see, I'm alone again, no Robert, but I do have two friends with me today that I'm very, very excited about. So we have Dr. Susan Wynn, board certified nutritionist, and Stephanie Striar, I'm sorry, of course I said it wrong, Stephanie Striar, who is a certified veterinary technician and the manager of veterinary education at Instinct Pet Food, which is a raw pet food company. So I am very excited to have a chance to hear about Instinct Pet Food and just a little bit about raw nutrition, and kind of maybe just have a chat about, your philosophy on food, why raw, just kind of the whole rundown. So if you guys are ready, take it away. I'd love to learn a bit about Instinct.
Great. Well, I can just tell you kind of how I came to Instinct. Before moving to Instinct in 2019, I was in practice for 31 years. Along the way, I started out with an internship and then did a fellowship in immunology at a medical school, and that was research, and came back to practice. And along the way, became very interested in integrative medicine. And when you're interested in integrative medicine, nutrition is the basic building block of health. And that's how I got into nutrition. And ultimately, I was doing some lecturing on it, and the nutritionist kind of took me under their wing. I think I was probably saying things incorrectly, and they encouraged me to get trained. And ultimately, I did a residency and got board certified in nutrition, and was in specialty practice for 11 years. And then I've been with Instinct since 2019.
Oh, wow.
Stephanie, what about you?
When you were in specialty practice, where were you?
Blue Pearl in Georgia.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, it was a big one. Lots of all the specialties, and it was great working with all of them.
You probably got a chance to see just such a variety of cases and see, again, I think you're so right. It's amazing how much we discount what our animals are eating, even what we're eating ourselves, and how it can maybe make inflammation worse or make, all sorts of diseases just so much worse. And so it's just pouring more medicine in when really we could maybe make some other sorts of changes and really see some positive impact. So that's awesome.
Exactly.
Very cool. And Stephanie, how'd you come to Instinct?
So my background, I was a tech in both small and large animal. And I personally had a dog who really challenged what I thought I knew about nutrition. She had a lot of food sensitivities and environmental allergies, and she pushed me outside of my comfort zone to look for dietary solutions that worked best for her. So that's how I started actually feeding a raw diet while I was still working in practice. And I loved how nutrition really transformed her life. And that's when I started to decide I wanted to become more focused in nutrition. And I started with Instinct on the retail side, and I have been able to transfer over into our veterinary channels. We've helped that grow. So that's been very exciting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's very cool. Very rewarding. It's so nice to be able to see different sides of this whole industry. It's like people's idea of veterinary medicine is so one specific thing, right? And you realize how many different varied things we can do just in this world. So that's really awesome. So I guess I want to learn a little bit more about raw, because like I was saying to you before we were talking, my only experience truthfully with raw is people just kind of grabbing a slab of meat and giving it to their dog. And that's not obviously nutrition. That's not complete and balanced, whether you cooked it or not, right? That's not really recommended either way. So I guess my question is, if you can give me maybe a bit of information, I know it's probably more than just an elevator pitch, but why raw?
Oh, yeah. It is definitely more than an elevator pitch.
Yeah, exactly.
So raw, I actually became interested in raw and minimally processed foods when I saw what was happening to my patients when I started recommending it. And I began recommending it in the old ones, the sick ones, and specifically the cancer patients. And they would come back, the owners would, and say, my dog is acting like a puppy again. My cat is playing again. Why wasn't I doing this from the beginning? And I had to answer that question for myself. And so this started a 15-year-long sort of study of minimally processed food. And as it turns out, it does seem to have some pretty strong clinical benefits. And what I noted was that it acted as an anti-inflammatory, I believe. And over the years, studies have been published that showing some benefits of raw, and I think that it's really amusing that veterinarians continue to say there's no proof of any benefits for raw feeding. That's not true at this point.
That's really interesting, because that is what I hear all the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. And so that, I guess I would love, I mean, if at some point, like, we could even, like, I would love any resources that you have, or just places to get that information, because it does seem that people just kind of put the kibosh down on it, and they're like, nope, there's nothing that proves that that's better than this. And you know what I mean? You're a nutritionist. You have specialty training in this. So that would surprise me that you would have that opinion if it didn't actually have some sort of proof,
right.
you know?
Well, I don't know if you have a web page that you can post them on, but I'm certainly willing to share papers. We've been at veterinary conferences now for 2 years, the biggest conferences. I've been lecturing, showing the evidence for raw feeding. And so we kind of like to think we're changing veterinarians' minds one at a time at the conferences.
Yeah. I do think anytime you have something that is a bit of a paradigm shift, it takes time. And especially when, you know, let's say you have an idea or a thought process that's just different than what everybody's been doing for a while, then you really have to win hearts and minds. And you also have to have people that are open to a conversation. And I do think that it is hard, like when you're in my position, you can't know everything, right? And there's some, you know, you have only so much time to learn about this or that or whatever. So that's why this has been great for me, because I'm open. I want to know, you know, what you've seen, why it's good. And I guess I am a little curious about, when you say minimally processed, is it just raw, or is there some process? Like, tell me more about the food, I guess.
Yeah, actually, that is interesting, because there are a lot of studies actually on the differences, the clinical benefits of raw versus kibble. There are fewer on the sort of cooked foods that are minimally processed, in that they prepare them like we would prepare our food for ourselves, and then cook them, and then they are sold frozen. There aren't as many studies to say that those have the same effects. We sort of theorize that the benefits are somewhere between kibble and raw. If you're talking about these cooked, they'll call them lightly cooked. I don't think anybody really knows what lightly cooked means, but that's the theory anyway, until they produce some more studies on those.
I want to back up a minute too, and like really define what we mean when we're saying raw diets, right? Because there is such a sliding scale about what that can mean to anyone listening to this podcast. So there's a big difference between homemade raw diets, like you mentioned, like raw meat that's thrown in a bowl, and what we do at Instinct. So we make commercial raw diets. And what I mean by that is we have complete and balanced raw diets. They are nutritionally complete. They have everything your pet needs to eat this as their sole source of nutrition. And we also make pathogen-free raw diets. And with that, raw for us is simply raw meat, fresh vegetables and fruits, and other wholesome ingredients to help balance that out, but it is truly never cooked.
Okay. And so when you say it's pathogen free, what does that mean exactly?
Sure. So we use our primary pathogen mitigation step, because we need our food to not only be safe for our pets to eat, but also us as people to handle, right? We use something called high pressure processing, or high pressure pasteurization, where it does keep the food cold, but it uses immense pressure to destroy those pathogens that we're typically concerned about in food safety, things like salmonella, E. coli, listeria. And then we go ahead after the product undergoes HPP, and we test the product to verify that it is truly free of all of those pathogens before it's released to sale.
That's really nice to hear, because that's always been two of my biggest concerns when people start to get into like talking about raw food, and especially the people who are like, oh, well, I just threw together these ingredients that I saw on a website and I just put them together, for a few different reasons, right? Because we're always fighting with this idea of the complete imbalance, right? The people who are like, well, my dog won't eat, so I just give them this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not great. We need to figure out what they're going to, how to give them a complete and balanced diet. Number one, I'm immunocompromised. So I always do think about, for those people who are handling the foods, how are we keeping them safe? And then also for those dogs that I've had that people were just throwing together a food, that have come in very, very sick because they had a horrific, food, issue, either with the coli or, like you said, they can get listeria, salmonella, all those things. So that's super helpful to me, because now I understand that is not a concern in this in this, and that makes me much more comfortable saying, yeah, go ahead, try it. But if you're going to do it safely. And that's always what I've said to people when it's a company I hadn't heard of. I'm like, well, call them, see if, do they culture the food? Do they make sure? I mean, any food can be contaminated, right? Even the kibbles, like that happens all the time. There's recalls. So nothing's 100%, but if you are doing your best to make sure it's safe, that's what I care about.
Yeah.
We actually recommend that people ask a company about their safety procedures and about how they know the food is complete and balanced. One kind of guideline for the questions to ask is guidelines on selecting a pet food that's published by the World Small Animal Veterinary Association, or WSAVA. And it's available on the web, and it has good questions like, do you employ a nutritionist full-time, a veterinary or PhD nutritionist? Who does the formulation and how experienced are they? How do you know your food is complete and balanced? Do you do feeding trials, or is it just a formulation? And if it's just a formulation, do you analyze what kind of, quality control happens during your manufacturing? And a lot of questions like that. What kind of testing for raw? We even have these additional questions like, what kind of testing do you do on the raw materials to make sure they're not full of bugs? And for instance, how often do you test for pathogens? We PCR 3 times during the process. And also what kind of certifications you have. We have SQF, which is Safe Quality Food Certification. That is very unusual among raw companies. We're the only one that has a certification for both safety and quality. And this is the same certification that the big pet food manufacturers have. They all have it. And the big food manufacturers for people, they all have it. So those are the kinds of questions and that we feel like you should ask of any company, raw or conventional. And that's available online.
Yeah, I love that, because that's exactly what I always try when people, are asking my opinion of things, when they're like, oh, well, what do you think of this food? And I'm like, well, truthfully, I haven't ever heard of that food, because there's a million foods out there. But I will often say, if they haven't done any feed testing, if a lot of those questions, maybe not all of them, that was a very good list. But I will say, because if they don't, then your dog is the test. And that's right. And if you're comfortable with that, then okay. I try to put it in that sort of a realm where people think a little bit like, oh yeah, I guess Rachel Ray might not be the best person to decide what my dog. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks out there that are making pet foods these days that I maybe don't have the appropriate credentials, and that goes from raw diet companies all the way up to processed diet companies. It's definitely not all foods out there are created equal, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I guess I have a question when we're talking about that. Do you guys do grain free? Is there, what's your feeling on that whole kind of association with the heart disease and all that?
Yes, we have some grain free. We have some with grain. That question has evolved since 2018.
Right.
And the thinking now is not that the problem are grain free diets, because there are grain free diets that have not been associated with the problem. The thinking has evolved to the possibility that peas or pulses, relations to peas like lentils and beans and things like that, or maybe potatoes, there may be something going on with those ingredients. One theory was that they result in a very high fiber diet, which could block the absorption of certain really essential things like amino acids. Another theory that they're working on right now is whether they may contain some sort of natural toxin that we haven't known about until recently, when the manufacturers started using more peas and potatoes in formulations. And so that's kind of where we are. And the conversation really has shifted from, don't feed grain-free diets to feed a diet from a manufacturer who knows what they're doing, because the great concentration of cases really was with 5 manufacturers that were newer on the scene and don't employ nutritionists. They only consult with, even if they did that. So the WSAVA guidelines, again, help you here. If for some reason you want to feed a grain-free diet, and, as a nutritionist, I don't think there's anything magical about them. But if you want to feed a grain-free diet, you can find a good one if you evaluate the companies in that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's really smart too, because I did notice that, maybe part of it is that like whatever their formulation was so haphazard that we don't even know, you know what I mean? So there was this great association because it all came along with that marketing of everybody needs to be on grain free all at the same time. So it's a bit confounding. I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing. So often I tell people just to stay away from those diets, mostly because those are the ones that they are always gravitating towards, those ones that are on that list that we know is associated. So I'm like, just for safety sake, just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really funny that those are exactly the ones that people are most attracted to, isn't it?
Their marketing is really good. I mean, even when I know better, I'll watch a commercial and I'm like, I feel food shamed. Like, you know what I mean?
I am a sucker for good marketing, so I definitely appreciate that also. Yeah.
And it's true. You like have to check yourself every once in a while. You're like, I know better. What am I doing? Why am I thinking this? So okay. And then, so as far as some of the pushback, have you seen people being more and more receptive to the idea of raw, or do you feel like you get a bit of pushback still?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a tough one. Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's definitely an evolution, right? There's so many people out there that want to feed less processed diets to their pets. I mean, even think about when you go to the doctor yourself every single year. There's two things that they say to you and they really hone in on. It's, are you getting enough exercise? And then, are you getting a well-rounded diet? How much of your diet is made from highly processed foods versus minimally processed foods? So if we even take like those two concepts and apply it to our pets, we're seeing that big shift in folks that are feeding a lot more of these minimally processed diets. So from the client base, it's been really interesting. A lot of folks are very receptive to it. On the veterinary side, we've
not
seen
so
a lot
much.
of progress. Yeah, but at the same time, like we've seen a lot of progress at these conferences. People are much more willing to say, hey, I'm on the fence. Tell me about your product. Tell me about your safety, or even, I just don't know, so teach me. And we're having good turnout at these lectures. So that's encouraging that there's a lot more people that are willing to listen than there are to come up to us and be like, absolutely not. Why are you here?
I think it's great that here's the thing. There are people who have goals, and we talked a little bit about this too. So we have to be able to meet them where they are and maybe even teach them, like you're saying, but also too, I mean, I can't dictate to every person how they're going to feed their pets, but I can tell them the safest way to do it that aligns with their goals as a person, because their family, that's their family. They're going to feed their dog how they see fit. So I'm glad that there is a safe way to do that.
I think for your listeners too, veterinarians are so worried about zoonotic diseases, these food pathogens that we've talked about. And because they don't have time to study up and because they're not familiar with the various types of raw food, they immediately think homemade. They immediately think that, just throwing some meat at the dog is what raw is. And I think for your listeners to say, no, I'm not going to do homemade. I'm going to supply from a company that makes safe raw food, pathogen-free and complete and balanced. That will help in the conversation.
Yeah. And then can I ask a little bit more about how the food looks, I guess? Like, is it, it's not a kibble then? Like, how is it, is it shelf stable though? Like, how does it all come?
It looks like a beef patty. It's available in different size patties, a big 8 ounce and a 4 ounce. And then there are these bites that are somewhat kibble sized. But the forms really are frozen raw, which is the classic, again, it's just like a beef patty. You treat it the same way. And then there's also freeze dried, which is shelf stable, and it's really convenient. It acts like a dry food. It just is quite different health benefit wise. And then there are combinations. Manufacturers have been making these boosted kibbles for a while, or coated kibbles. Coated kibbles have a little bit of a raw coating on it. The boosted kibbles generally have about 5% raw pieces in the kibble pieces. We've got one that has 20%, which is based on some science out there saying that's sort of the threshold to start getting some benefits.
Okay. So you have to have at least that, is what you're saying.
Yes, okay. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fantastic question too, right? Because a lot of folks automatically think those like prey model raw bowls where it's like a chicken foot and a raw quail egg and some meat mince that's in a bowl, and that's not what this looks like at all. It is a homogeneous grind, if you will, that's been shaped. So it is very like user friendly for people as well, and pets. It's highly palatable, so they're very excited at mealtime.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds like it would be. And then for cats, moisture wise, I always wonder, because I am always trying to counsel cat owners to kind of use more of the canned food, get it more moisture in their diet and things like that. And so I'm curious to know how does that look? What's the breakdown for cats?
Cats, the product lineup is the same. So we offer
Okay.
frozen raw or freeze-dried raw for cats. The frozen raw is a high moisture diet, so moisture level wise, it's comparable to feeding another wet diet like canned or pouches.
Okay, so more like canned than like a dry kibble.
Correct. Yeah.
You notice that they go and drink less then too, just like they do with canned food, or what have you seen with cats? I'm just curious.
They will. You actually do have clients coming in and saying suddenly, like, my cat isn't drinking water anymore. Well, your cat is probably taking in the same amount of water during the day that it did before. It's just making up for what it wasn't getting in the kibble. So yeah.
Yeah, and then a bit more like less carbohydrates, I would guess, for the
very
kids.
Low carbohydrate.
Okay.
Canned usually is considered a little lower carbohydrate than kibble. Kibble has to contain carbohydrate, but this is about the lowest you can possibly get. Mostly because you have to cook carbohydrate sources to make them digestible, right? And then it's not a raw diet, so very, very low in digestible carbohydrates.
How do you find? So, do you have veterinary diets that are specific for disease processes at all, or no?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, is it coming?
Can't say.
Not currently. Everything that we have that is in market currently is designed for healthy pets, but we do have diets that are designed for growth, so they're good for puppies or kittens, and then we have diets that are designed for our adult dogs and cats as well.
Very cool.
And then seniors, which is that's a really great life stage to do a lot of good with. And so the senior diet is really interesting. It's got not just functional ingredients, but ingredients you don't see anyplace else, like, for instance, lemon balm for cognitive function, along with MCT oil, and turmeric along with the fish oil and the glucosamine for mobility. So the life stage diets are pretty interesting.
And actually for real, because I think a lot of the other foods say there, but if you actually look, when you actually read, it says it's formulated for all life stages. So you're like, well, that's marketing. That's not
exactly. Exactly.
But I like to hear that too. I mean, I have rheumatoid arthritis, so that's everything you're saying. I'm like, oh, I know of that. So for all those poor dogs out there that really do struggle, and I have tried to use some of the prescription diets and things like that, for joint health, but not every dog will eat them. Not every dog is, so it always is nice to have a different way to go, especially if it doesn't align with people. Like we talked about before, there are some people that just have no interest in, those prescription diets, and that's fine. I just need to have another option. And so I would be very curious. So it sounds to me, though, even for some of those diabetic cats who maybe can't or won't eat, a diabetic diet, it sounds to me that instinct might really work well for them.
That was my finding in practice. Aside from being very low in carbohydrate and high in protein, as I mentioned, we think, because there is some data for it, that raw diets are anti-inflammatory. And with the hyperglycemia going on, a lot of these guys and the oxidative stress, a lot of these guys do have a sort of a chronic inflammatory state. So it helps for more reasons than just the low carbohydrate part of it.
Yeah, I think there are so many cats just running around that are just big balls of inflammation.
Yes.
All the time, from their mouths to their bellies to their, bladders.
Agreed. Yeah, and you'll find more cat vets open to raw, I think, than general practitioners who don't specialize in cats. I feel like they are more open and they've seen those kinds of things that you and I have.
Yeah. Well, it would make sense, I suppose, if your patient is going to go out and eat a mouse, I mean,
Yeah.
you can't really control that. That's certainly raw.
Yeah.
This is a much better way to do it, it sounds like.
Right.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I think this is fascinating. I'm really glad to get to learn, what you guys mentioned. I mean, especially the safety profile, because to me, my biggest, I think, misunderstanding or even just lack of education where this came in was understanding how it could be safe for a dog to eat it. And then, being able to see that, hey, there's really systems put into place to keep these from causing secondary problems. To me, that was always my biggest concern really with it.
Yeah.
And that's fair. It should be. Those should be big concerns when we're talking about raw. And that's, again, like links back to why it's so important to know the companies that you're feeding from.
Well, and I think it's the biggest red flag there is. If a company is not willing to answer those questions and they can't say what their food does on the other end and how they know that it's safe and all those things, they probably shouldn't be making food for pets.
I agree.
Exactly. We are all agreed on that.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm glad. But I can't tell you guys, how much I appreciate you guys coming. Is there anything else that you'd like to share or add? Or, I mean, you guys have done such a great job kind of painting a picture of what instinct is and why raw and all that other stuff. I mean, I really, I feel like I've learned so much, so I'm so appreciative, but I'd love to know if there's any other things you'd like to add.
Yeah, I think just for folks to know that it is really simple to start feeding a minimally processed diet like raw. It doesn't have to be 100% of what you're shifting your pet to. You can get those benefits from doing something as little as 20%. So swapping out 20% of their food, and it's convenient, right? We have a frozen raw bite option that's just like scoop and serve, like you're scooping a kibble, or we have shelf stable freeze dried also. And there's a lot of people that have this misconception that feeding raw is really challenging or time consuming to do, and it is not that.
Okay, I love that. I mean, certainly that I think is a big thing. If people can get proper nutrition in a way that is accessible, to me, that is probably a lot of people's barrier to entry, is feeling like I feel way overwhelmed by that. So that's super helpful. Dr. Wynn, anything else?
No, I think Stephanie covered that well.
She did. You guys are wonderful. I can't thank you enough. I mean, I really feel like I said that I learned a lot, and I would love if you don't mind forwarding any of the information that you have, just so that I can keep learning. And we can also share it on our app. And I know Robert's gonna be really sad that he missed this, because he's really did. You guys are wonderful. So I can't thank you enough. If anybody ever has any questions, and I would even forward them to you or ask, I would really appreciate it. And people can email me at podcast@mybalto.com. And I just thank you guys so much. Hopefully I'll see you at one of these conferences coming up.
Yeah, hope to see you in person soon.
Thank you. Well, this has been the Pause It Podcast. Thank you guys so much for coming again. And thanks everyone for listening.